Welcome to Wadsworth History on Film, a program presented by the Wadsworth Area Historical Society and designed to record the oral history of Wadsworth for posterity. I'm Caesar Carino, your host, and our guest for the second time today is Dick Curtis. Dick, you were here the other day talking to us and giving us a lot of the background of downtown Wadsworth, and I think we probably got to about your third or fourth birthday by the end of the first hour, so we're gonna hit it some more. But one of the things that you were talking about, Dick, when we left off the other day was somewhat of a friendship. Well, more than somewhat of a friendship, was a real friendship between your father, C.B. Curtis, and Dick Huntsberger. And Dick Huntsberger, as everyone knows, lives to be 104 years old.
Right.
So, and right now he would be about, what, 120 or so years old. Tell us about that type of a friendship that they had, what they did. And they just
well, I think when we left the last time, I told you that they spent a lot of time at a coffee shop or a delicatessen across the street. And this particular time, my father was barbing Dick and amusing the crowd by a story. His dry goods store was 5 doors down from my father's clothing store.
And Dick Huntsberger's.
Yes, and there was an alleyway led up there and a saloon, Sam Wilshaw's Saloon. And my father tells the story, an exaggerated and probably not too true, but for dramatic effect, that Dick used to go by several times a day, and it got so he wore a little trench in there, and pretty soon it became a little ditch. And after a while, he said all he could see was Dick's hat going by.
Dick's hat.
And the crowd liked that. They thought that was funny.
They had that little repartee that went back and forth between them.
And one time, Dick had a habit. Dick always dressed up.
Oh,
always,
yes, necktie and a suit.
For a loafer, he always said we always thought he was dressed pretty well.
He was dressed very well.
Necktie and suit and all that works. So this particular, he would come down in the morning all dressed, then it would get warm and he'd leave his coat somewhere. So one day my dad hid his suit coat, and he looked all over at the various places he'd been, couldn't find it, gave up. The next day he came in and bought a suit, and then after that was all altered and paid for, my dad gave him his suit coat back.
What did Dick say to that?
Oh, they did that kind of thing to each other all the time.
That's the best kind of friendship, where you can just do almost anything and have unconditional love returned. Dick was somewhat of a politician in his own right, wasn't he? He didn't get into politics, but he certainly did talk a lot about them, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
What do you think it'd be fair to tell what political party he belonged to?
Well, I think he was an ardent Republican.
An ardent Republican, an absolute ardent.
Interestingly, Willard married Orpha Brown, whose father was a professor at Hiram, I believe. And she was sort of the opposite, and they used to get into some heated discussions.
And I don't think that Orpha would back down from anybody.
No, and if Orpha's listening, I apologize for getting into the story, but I think she'd appreciate it.
Oh, Orpha would love it. We interviewed Orpha. She was one of the first ones we interviewed.
That's great.
And she was tremendous. We're hoping to get her again. Some of the things that you mentioned the last time, Dick, piqued our interest. And rather than to have me just ask you to go over those, in the interest of time, because we won't get through this hour unless we do, I'm going to ask you to recite from your notes exactly what those things are that I asked you to research so that we would have them.
Mr. Huntsberger was always made our store a stop on his daily routine. People knew where to find him. And among those who looked for him oftentimes was Marguerite Straighton.
Marguerite Straighton, who was a school teacher.
Yes, and she was very knowledgeable, and Mr. Huntsberger, incidentally, with all his frivolous ways, was a very good student of Civil War history. He read all of Dickens' books. He read
bright man.
Yes, he was. And she'd come in and look for him, and they'd have discussions. But Dr. Etter, longtime pastor of the Lutheran Church, often came to...
We're going to spell that for posterity, E-T-T-E-R.
That's right.
Do you remember his first name by chance?
Dr. I do not.
It's all right. We don't have to have
because it. Because the doctor sort of precluded...
That was his first name.
Names, right. And they had many, many interesting discussions, and I enjoyed kibitzing on a lot of them. Now, Dr. Etter had two children that might be interesting to you. May Etter, who married the Rohr in Barton and Rohr.
Right, and that would be the one that had the Steiner and Rohr first,
Yes.
which was the Dodge and Chrysler agency.
And then May had a son, Bob Rohr, who for a long time was in the auto mechanics school here.
Here in Wadsworth, right.
Right here
Wadsworth
in this
High
school. Yes.
And Bob Rohr graduated in 1948 with me.
Is that right?
And his mother was Dr. Etter's daughter, right?
Daughter.
Dr. Etter, the minister, the Lutheran minister's daughter.
That's right. And Dr. Etter had a son named, his nickname was Webb, or it might have been his real name, Webb. But he was one of the outstanding athletes in Wadsworth's history. I think he went on to Toledo University.
Is that right? Now this would be Bob Rohr's uncle,
Yes.
Webb Etter.
That's right.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. Now the other day, Carl Harder mentioned the tennis courts on
That's
College
right.
Street. And I think he mentioned the Pardee name, but P.D. Pardee was the man who liked and enjoyed that tennis court. Interestingly, when P.D. was born, he weighed not much over a pound. How
Wow.
they kept him alive is a miracle.
Well, he weighed more than that in his older days, didn't he?
He grew to be quite large. And
How big was P.D. when he was finally fully grown?
he was 6 foot something. And
Easily 4, 6'4", 5.
something in there.
And heavy.
Yes. He had a lifetime nervous twitch. It was kind of like, you've seen horses that twitch?
Yeah.
He'd do that once in a while. But everybody liked Petey. In fact, when he was married, he had the crowd entertained with a shivaree. Did you ever hear of that?
I've heard about it, but I surely don't know what it is.
I couldn't spell it, but I can pronounce it.
Shivaree.
When a person of some well-known in the town would get married, the crowd would gather at their home. And when the crowd was big enough, they thought, well, the person would tell them to go down to either Brunneman's drugstore or to the Rexall drugstore, Sears and Durhammer, and they set them up. And sometimes there'd be 20, 30, 40 people in a march down to enjoy a treat. J.K. Durling had a very large one. He was president of the Wadsworth Savings and Trust. When he was married, there was a huge crowd.
For a shivaree.
For a shivaree.
Now, what did they do? I mean, what would they do at the drugstore?
They'd set them up, and later the person would come in and pay the bill.
Oh, I see. In other words, they would have something to drink or
ice cream or whatever.
But then someone would come in and pay the bill. Now, J.K. Durling, who was the head of the Wadsworth Savings and Trust, was the father of James Durling, the physician. Is that correct?
That's right.
Who also had a son, James.
That's right.
Who did not become a physician. That Dr. Durling, James, that'd be the son of the bank president, died about 40 years ago or so, didn't he?
That's pretty close.
I can't remember exactly, but it was many, many years ago. It's a good
But that was one of the big shivarees. There were others, but I recall P.D. Parties and J.K. Durling because they were so large.
And you remember that?
Oh, I was in them.
You were.
I marched right down there for ice
Who would usually pay for the shivarees?
Who would?
Who would usually pay for the shivarees? Someone would come in and pay for it, right?
Oh, yes. Either P.D. Party or J.K. Durling or whoever it was got married and told the crowd to go down.
Oh, I see. The person himself would pay for the shivaree. I'm not positive, but I think I have seen it spelled, and it's Chivaree, but I'm not positive.
That's the way I have it written, but I wasn't certain.
Chivaree. I'm not positive, but I'm sure that someone out there is going to be able to tell us. Now, the person who's going to be able to tell us, if I can find her, or I know where she is exactly, would be P.D. Pardee's, P.D. Pardee would be her cousin, and she would be his cousin. That's Caroline Pardee, who was at the University of Akron for years and years and years. She is about 87 years old now, 86 or 87 years old, and still sharp as a tack and probably the master of words if I've ever seen one. She'll know what a shivaree is, and she'll remember.
Well, he came from a distinguished family.
Yes.
There was a Judge Pardee and a representative to the legislature. And
there were several Judge Pardees.
Yes. They were a distinguished family. They
Aaron Pardee was our first mayor.
Yes,
That was our great uncle.
They had a big home up at Stony Ridge.
Yes, they called it Vacation Ridge.
And,
Yeah, Vacation Ridge, which is at Stony Ridge, which is now Reimer Road.
Yes. They had a large home up there. It wound up around the hill there.
Right. And all of the descendants are buried in our cemetery, in Woodlawn Cemetery.
Yes, that's
Caroline
right.
comes every Memorial Day to put flowers there. Caroline's a very good personal friend of mine.
That's
If
wonderful.
she is physically able to, I would like to interview her. She knows more about Wadsworth than anyone
Well, she
personally I
can
know.
tell you that Petey ended up in Florida. He had a motel down there
Oh, is that right?
in St. Petersburg. And I don't know what happened after that, but I do recall that. I'd like to go into something. My wife's name is Nadine, and her maiden name was Williams.
Williams, Nadine Williams.
Yes, and she worked at Brenneman's drugstore from her junior year till we were married. And we've been married 58 years.
Now, Nadine is a little bit younger than you.
Yes, a little bit.
Yes, a little bit younger than you. And she graduated probably in 37, 38?
36.
36, okay. Because she was a very popular girl in high school.
Yes, and,
Very popular.
And she was popular in the drugstore. On
That's popular.
Saturday afternoons, they used to make a big chocolate soda, 5 cents.
I remember that.
Banana split, 15 cents. I went over there apparently one time too many because I asked her to marry me. The chocolate sodas were so good.
They were so good you thought that she could do that at home. Now, did she make any chocolate sodas after you were married?
She hasn't made one since.
Not once. What?
But,
tell us about Nadine more fully, her family, and who her father was.
Well, her father was foreman at the Ohio Match Company.
And his first name was what?
George.
George
Yeah.
Williams.
But I want to tell you about our children. I'm leading up to something.
Okay.
We had Marilyn, a girl, and two
Yes.
boys, Jim and Bob. And they in turn had children who became our grandchildren. And 2 weeks ago, we had a great-grandchild, the eighth one.
Eighth great-grandchild.
But here's what I want to tell you. Tom, the boy that's here in school in maintenance,
Yes.
has twins, a boy and a girl. They're a little less than half a year old. But I want to lead up to this. When Nadine and I started having children in 1940, Dr. Klotz was our doctor.
Dr. Nevin J. Klotz.
Nevin John Murray.
Nevin John Murray Klotz.
Fine physician, excellent surgeon.
He came in 1937, I believe.
His fee for prenatal care and delivery was $50, and the hospital bill was $5 a day. Now, they kept him in the hospital in those days about 10 days and
Yes,
sent
they
him
did.
home in an ambulance. That's much different today. But what I'm leading up to the point is that I asked my grandson Tom how much those twins cost for prenatal care and delivery, and he told me $14,000. Now I took a retake. My hearing is a little bad, so I asked him to repeat that, and that's correct, $14,000.
$14,000.
Yeah,
Dr. Klotz charged you $50.
$50.
And for an additional $50, she stayed in the hospital for 10 days.
That's right.
I went to the hospital about a couple of years ago with what we thought was pneumonia, and it turned out that it was pneumonia. And they got the bill, which was in the thousands of dollars. And I was
Yeah.
there for 23 hours, in the thousands of dollars. And there was a little codicil on there that said, incidentals, $63. So I raised my hand and said, what are these incidentals, $63? You know that little plastic toothbrush you get, and the little cups and the little, all that stuff that they have to throw, that cost $63. And she was able to get 10 days, your wife was able to get 10 days of really good care. Those were wonderful nurses down there. That Mrs. McDonald, remember her?
Very well.
And they gave
And the two sisters,
yes, what names?
short name, I can't recall
Yes,
it.
yes, I know them well.
But the care was excellent.
Excellent care for $5 a day.
Yeah.
You can't get a shoe shine for $5 a day.
Now, incidentally, something interesting about that municipal hospital, it belonged to the Ohio Match Company. And Mr. E.J. Young and the company donated it to the city for a municipal hospital. Very few stipulations, pretty much freehand, but I can't recall what it was before.
It was the horse barn,
That's what I thought, and it didn't seem
the
logical.
stable or whatever.
Yes, that's what it was.
1921. The first two people to be born in there were Harriet Crawford and Bob Clapper.
Is that
They were
right?
born in 1922, I believe, or something like that.
That's pretty interesting.
1921 and 22 that they were born, but they were the first
Yeah.
two people born there. The hospital staff was, I wish we could think of the nurses' names, and somebody's going to call me right after the program. Someone will call me to tell me what those nurses' names were, and that's great because that's where we're going to.
Began with something like
Yes, it'll come to us a little
Okay.
later on.
Very good.
Tell us again. Tell us more then about your father-in-law, George Williams. He had a special talent, didn't he?
Well, he was a real nice guy, a pleasant fellow and a good man.
But at the match shop in those days, you had to have more than just brawn.
Well, yes. He did his job well, I understand.
He was, and a lot of people in Wadsworth worked for George Williams.
That's right.
Good people.
Yeah. Now, something we talked about the other day was Curtis Cottage.
Right?
And we didn't mention that. I'll let you take it from there.
Curtis Cottage was given to the University of Akron in 1890?
A year or so after that.
Okay, 1890, 1891. And it probably still stands this very minute. I've been gone from the university for 9 years, but when I left there, Curtis College was a mail room, but at that time it was used for classrooms. Psychology was taught in Curtis College, and English was taught in Curtis College. And it was named for, I believe, a deceased son of your uncle, is that right?
It was my great-uncle.
Great-uncle.
His name was Pitt Curtis.
Pitt Curtis.
Yes.
And was there he had a son who was...
A son died at age 9, and it was our only child, and this donation was in his memory.
Now, that was probably 1/3 of the university at one time. Do you have any idea how much that cost?
I'd have to have you work that out for me.
But I mean, how much did they give you at that point? How much did Pitt Curtis give for that cottage?
$50,000.
$50,000. Wow. I would imagine $50,000 now would be very close to $5 million from 1890.
Possible.
Yeah,
It's possible.
It's a lot of money that I know that I think that Franklin School or Lincoln School, I think both were built about the same time. I think they cost maybe a couple $100,000, $240,000 or $50,000. To build an elementary school now, you can't even touch it for less than $5 million.
That's right.
So it's probably a lot of money.
We talked about something in our other session about cars, about Mrs. Prince's Stearns night going through the booth downtown. There was another interesting thing about cars. The Chandler, they also made Cleveland.
Yes,
the Chandler.
yes, that's right.
Harv Gross, that's Abner's father.
Abner Gross's father from the grocery store?
He was a butcher to start with, and he got into the automobile business. Mm-hmm. And there was quite a sensation when Abner drove that car up Sherbandi Hill in Akron on high.
And we have to identify where Sherbandi Hill is. It's on the boundary line of Norton and Akron on 261, and it's a long winding hill.
Yes.
And it's very difficult to negotiate.
Does it go down into Worcester Avenue?
It goes down into Worcester Avenue.
Right.
Now, it certainly would not be difficult to negotiate today with today's powerful cars.
Oh, today cars will gain speed going up there. But at this time, that was a sensation. They got a little running start down Worcester Avenue and went right up on high.
And they went up went on high gear.
Yes.
Now, those cars, what kind did they have, a Stearns?
No.
Or what kind of?
Chandler.
Chandler.
Yes.
They probably didn't have more than 24, 25 horsepower at that time.
Very low.
Very
I
low
don't know what they were.
And it was very difficult. As a matter of fact, Acme Hill was one of the testing grounds for those cars, too. Now, who had this? Mr. Gross?
Yeah, Harv Gross.
Do you remember what year that was?
It was in the 20s.
In the 20s.
Yes.
See, things
or 30.
Cars in the 20s were not very powerful at all.
Late 20 or 30.
That early?
Yes.
They weren't very powerful at all. Do you remember, talking about cars, we'll get back to what you're talking about there, Did you have to have a driver's license when you first learned how to drive?
No, my grandfather, Dick Weaver, taught me to drive when I was 12 years old.
And how did he teach you?
Well, he just put me in the driver's seat and instructed me what to do.
And you did it?
And there weren't many cars around, so traffic was no problem.
No problem. What kind of car was it? Do you remember?
It was an Overland, 1912.
A 1912.
1 year older than I was.
Wow. Now, you do remember that some of the cars, the Model T Fords, did not have a gear shift, but they had 3 levers.
Yes.
But the Overland had gear shifts.
They had.
So you had to learn to drive a stick shift, what some of our young high school kids now learn to do because it's the popular thing to do.
Yes.
But you learned to drive a stick shift, and it was not a synchronized stick shift either.
No, Rio later on came out with probably the first thing approaching automatic.
Yes, in 1938, I believe,
Yeah.
in the Rio and the Olsen.
Sort of a clutchless shifting.
Yes, shifting.
Before we get too far along, I want to get into Pico Sechrist,
Okay.
Sterling Sechrist. At one time, he was interviewed by Joe Klosterman, and in this interview, he told about when Pico and I and Harv Gross, who we just mentioned, played in the
Right.
town band. And we played a trick on Harv one time. He'd sort of follow us, and we waited till there was a quiet time, and we pretended we were going to come down strong, and
With your drums.
and we didn't, and he did, and he was embarrassed, and he really took after us. He
With his
had
drumsticks?
Well, he had a pretty good temper.
Oh,
In
boy.
fact, when my dad, one of his other jobs when he was young, he worked for Harv Gross. They'd go out in the country and buy cattle. And he told me a story. One day, a bull was chasing him, and my dad jumped over the fence. Harvey stared that bull down. The bull came up to him and looked at him and walked away.
Wow.
He was nervy.
You might say that he was nervy. And Harvey actually stared that bull down?
Yes. Now, we were starting on Pico. Do you know how he got his nickname?
Not really.
Well, some years ago, there were 2 fellows started a colonial tea room on College Street. The one was Charles Rickard.
Charlie Rickard?
Charles Rickard. He was the uncle of Mary Harper,
Okay.
a well-known, fine lady, very crippled. They used to have to lift her in and out of her wheelchair. And ultimately, they got a car rigged up for her that she could drive with hand control. Very nice thing that they did for her.
Now, which Mary Harper is this? How old would she be right now?
Oh, she'd be 100 and...
Oh, because I went to school with a Mary Harper who was also crippled. Her mother was Grace Harper. Not the same person, probably.
Could it be possible?
No, because Mary Harper would be only about 70 years old now.
No, that couldn't be.
Yeah, I wonder if it could be a granddaughter of
It's possible.
time possible, because she was very
But
crippled.
anyway, back to the story. One day I was talking to Bill Heil, who also had just come out of the Army not long before, and took a job with the employment office in Barberton. And the reason he took the job was so that he could look at the jobs coming through and take one of the best ones if he chose. And he came to see me and he said, I have an application for a job at the Citizens Bank. Do you know anyone that would fill that bill? I said, I have your man. Wait till I call him out of the basement.
Wow.
And Sterling started with him and had a very successful career.
Oh, he did. He became the president of the bank.
Yes. Now, I thought maybe when Sterling got into politics and became a commissioner, he might reward me a little. Maybe a little graft like a road paving contract or something.
Like that?
Or even better, a high-paying job like president of the Wadsworth Historical Society.
One of those high-paying jobs, right.
But that, Sterling and I have had a friendship for a long time.
Sterling's a great person. We are on opposite sides of the fence politically, but we have optimum respect for one another because of his abilities and all of the good things that he has done for this community and for his family as an outstanding family, and we're so pleased to have him, as we are with you as well. Your family is an outstanding family as well.
Now, my grandfather, I thought we'd finish with him, Richard Weaver, when we told about his automobile and the waterworks and the phone company, but now the fire department put out a book last year, very interesting. You've gone through this, I'm sure.
Yes, I have.
And I only want to take just time enough for one incident here. In 1881, the Wadsworth Council of the Incorporated Village of Wadsworth teamed up with my grandfather, Richard Weaver, to provide water for their fire service. And ultimately, they bought 200 feet of large hose, and they kept it under his front porch at 156 Main Street. And
under his front porch?
That was where they stored it. He, in fact, might be called the first firehouse.
Oh, for heaven's sakes, that's something.
They still had to depend on the bucket brigade because they only had 200 feet of hose, and they had to connect it wherever they could. But I thought that was interesting. And one more thing, the charge for water at that time in 1889 and 90 for house use was $6 a year.
Wow.
For a barn, for each horse, mule, or cow was $1. For a water closet, I presume we know what that is, $3.
For the whole year?
Yes. For washing buggies with a hose, $1. And for hot water range, $2. And then for livery barns, hotels, factories, they negotiated.
They negotiated on those.
But that ends my stories about my grandfather on that side.
That's an interesting story. We have several more questions, unless you have some more things in your little book.
Well, I'll let you...
Okay, we have a lot more questions. From the center of town north, right now, we have the Myers Block, which of course is the northwest corner of High and College. And the Myers Block includes the business utilities right now, and the craft shop, and Bixler Electric. And then there's an alley. Beyond the alley, there were several things in there which are no longer there. Hotel, veterinarians, and so forth. How much of a memory can you give us regarding the hotel and the veterinary shops and things like that?
Well, I remember the veterinarian, Dr. Kreider, had a very successful veterinary practice. When he first started, incidentally, his father and mother ran the Kreider house.
Which is what?
The hotel.
The hotel.
Yes.
Right there.
Right next to it.
It eventually became the Park Hotel, but
that's right.
It was the Kreider house.
Yeah.
And describe it, because we don't, all we have are some pictures of it.
The Kreider house was quite a nice old-time
beautiful
hotel.
Oh.
Traveling men used to come and stay there, and Mrs. Kreider provided meals. Outstanding, I've heard, been told. But anyway, when Dr. Kreider first came back and started practice, he wasn't very busy. So he devised a plan. He'd get in his buggy and whip the horse and go off in this direction today and that direction tomorrow. And people began to say, my, Dr. Kreider's quite busy. And pretty soon he had quite a nice practice.
What's that old story about if you build the building, they'll come, or something like that? If you build it, they'll come to it. Is there anything that was significant about the Kreider house in terms of a baby being left there?
I can't remember that story. I know of it, but I can't give you details about it.
We're going to have to get someone who can remember that,
Yes.
because there was a baby that was left there.
I stayed in the Crider Hotel when I was quite young.
Could you describe the inside? We have pictures of the outside, but we don't have the pictures of the inside.
Well, the rooms were not like modern.
No.
They were rather plain, but they were comfortable. The furniture was comfortable. The reason I stayed there for a while is my oldest sister was getting ready to go to Ohio State with Clara Brenneman.
Clara Brenneman.
Her name was Clara Beck then.
Clara Beck.
And she got scarlet fever just when she was supposed to go. Could not make it, never did make it. But during the time she had that, my mother stayed with her and my father took the other 3 children and we stayed at the hotel.
How long were you there?
It was several weeks.
That would have been probably in the early 30s, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Because your sister would be very close to 100 years old now.
No, it'd be a little earlier than that.
Would it? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she graduated in 22
From high school.
from high school.
So it'd be in the mid-20s then.
Yes.
She would be close to 100 now, wouldn't she? Your sister?
Oh no, she's 93.
Oh, she's 93? Well,
Yeah.
that's pretty close to 100.
Yeah. And I remember as a young lad wandering downstairs and looking in on these traveling men sitting there smoking cigars and puffing away. A lot of them were made in Wadsworth, the Bracer, made by Yoder Brothers.
Where is that?
They were in the second story of the building on the southeast corner of Broad and Main.
Above the jewelry store, and right now, what's there?
I'm not certain about now. It was,
But that's the one on the southeast corner
Yes.
of Broad and Main.
and above there were the Yoder Brothers, and they made fine hand-rolled cigars.
Now, are those the same Yoder brothers that have the greenhouses in Barberton?
They could be related, but they weren't the same.
They weren't the same people.
No.
And they made hand-rolled
And
cigars.
their best brand name was the Bracer.
Bracer, B-R-A-C-E-R.
Right.
When were they in operation? Do you remember them at all?
Oh, it's a little hazy.
But we're talking about the early teens, is that right?
And into the 20s.
And into the
late
20s as well.
Yeah.
The hotel, or the Crider House, had about 20 or 25 rooms, didn't it?
Yes.
They had an upstairs,
Yes.
and they had a staircase to go upstairs.
Yeah.
Can you describe that staircase?
Well, it was kind of interesting. It was intriguing. As a matter of fact, it wound around a little and was quite interesting.
Massive stairs
Yeah.
with rails, or seemed like no one could possibly get his hand around it. But
That's right.
Just a beautiful thing. Now, right north of, well, in that place right now is the Ritzman Center, but right north of that there was what we called the Masonic Temple.
That's right.
When was that built, and could you describe that, and who was instrumental in building that when it was built?
I can't tell you when it was built, but I know that they gave it, the Masons gave it up, and the Lions Club took it over and made a project out of it for public use.
It became the rec center for a long time.
Yes, the Lions Club promoted that.
But was that there when you were growing up, or was that there after you?
No, that was there when I was growing up.
That is the
Yes.
the Masonic Temple.
Yes. Now, you mentioned that building, Myers Block.
The Myers Block.
On the second floor was Dr. Goss's office,
Who was a dentist?
a dentist,
Paul Goss, wasn't it?
Paul Goss. And there was also a bowling alley up there one
Big
time.
bowling alley, that's right.
And at that time, there were young boys setting pins by hand, and they had to jump and get out of the way when the pins started to fly.
As a matter of fact, they would come to the high schools and pick out young boys to
Yes.
to set pins, and they would get maybe 10 cents a game, and there might be 5 games. You get 50 cents for maybe 4 or 5 hours of work.
Glenn Williams got started there, and the 2 Williams twins.
And Glenn Williams and the 2 twins were avid bowlers, weren't they?
Yes, they were.
As a matter of fact, were they not professional, but they were really regarded
Very
as being
good
some of the very
amateurs.
best. The twins were, Glenn himself was the older, and the twins were younger. Is
Yeah,
that correct?
that's
And the
correct.
twins would be about 75, and Glenn would be probably 80 or 80 or so, somewhere in that area. Now, we had the rec center. or the Masonic Temple, which turned into the rec center, and then they finally made it into a senior center, and they've remodeled it and revamped it and all of those other kinds of things. Across the alley of King Street was the Methodist or the Lutheran Church.
Yeah.
Do you remember when that was built?
I don't remember when it was built. I know that E.J. Young was one of the large donors, and it's a magnificent architecture.
Oh, it's beautiful, absolutely
Always
beautiful.
has been outstanding and visited by many people.
I understand that, I don't know if this is true yet, but at one time it was considered to be one of the best architectural reflections in the United States.
It's very good.
It's just a beautiful place, and they, of course, they've added on to it. But when it was first there, it was nothing more than the church itself
Right.
and the basement underneath.
E.J. and his family were very big donors to the church.
That surely makes a lot of sense. Now, you're going to wonder why I'm going up the street, but we'll come to that in a minute. There's a huge house in which Fixler has his real estate insurance. What was that house before?
I'm afraid you have me at a loss. I know it was there, but I cannot identify it.
There's a gas station just south of that, but
Yes.
that was not there then.
No.
What was there, do you remember?
Well, it was this big house, and I don't
Huge
remember
house,
much about it.
A beautiful place. We're going to have to find someone who's going to give us the background on that one.
That's
Maybe one of
right.
the Fixlers can. Now, as you go up High Street, on the west side of the street, there are several houses, one right after another. Do you remember when High Street pretty well ended at Route 261?
It pretty well ended at the Akron Road.
Which is 261?
Yes.
What was beyond that?
Farms.
All farms?
Yes. Herb Hutchinson's farm was a part of that, and
Herb Hutchinson or Herb Nixon?
well, both of them.
Both?
Yes. It was all farmland. Later on, it was developed by, I think Bill Good had something to do with developing it.
Bill Good?
Yeah, Will Good.
Well, good.
But anyway, it was all farmland. It's all developed now.
Do you remember a big pond up there?
Yes.
And what was the social event of the year for people of your age in the 20s?
You're thinking of the Trump Pond?
Yes.
Yes, that was great for ice skating.
And who would be permitted to go there?
Well, they let people in if they behaved themselves, and it was a very generous offer because of a nice place to skate.
How big was it?
It's hard to describe, but it was big enough to have a lot of fun skating.
Did you ever go?
Yes.
And did many people go up there?
Oh, yes.
Do you remember any incidents up there that would be noteworthy?
Well, not particularly. I know that, of course, that was the source of water supply for my grandfather's waterworks. The pond and a well. They had a big well there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Trump home was built by Ross Trump.
Who was a...
He was interested in a rubber company in Akron.
In Akron.
He started one in Wadsworth. And at one time, Mrs. Trump put on teas, afternoon teas. And at one time, they had a miniature golf thing there. They had come upon times where a little income was good to have.
And then they had some difficult times, too, later
Yes.
on.
Mhm.
As a matter of fact, I believe that he had some severe financial problems, did he not?
Yes,
And then, is it true that he took his own life?
yes,
And when was that? Do you remember? About 1930, 31, 32, somewhere in that area?
in that area.
Do you remember when that happened?
Yes.
And do you remember what the newspaper said?
Well, it was not quite as big as Princess Diana, but it was big
It
news
was
locally.
big news locally, right.
Yes.
Why was it so big locally?
Well, he was a prominent guy and colorful. And
When you
he-
say colorful, can you describe colorful a little bit more in detail?
well, his manner was a little pushy.
A little pushy.
Yeah, he had the qualities for becoming an exec and
An executive.
a promoter, a developer.
Right. The rubber company that Mr. Trump had in Wadsworth was where, and do you have any, do you
It was
remember?
in an alley somewhere near the school.
Right near the school, as a matter of
Yes.
fact. And do you remember much about that rubber company, what they tried
Not
to
too
build?
much. There was a company in there made balloons.
Mm-hmm.
And they did some other things, I'm not sure just what.
And do you remember, while we're talking about rubber company, and I want to go back to that High Street because I have a point here. Do you remember the Chemetex?
Oh, yeah.
And what was it called before that?
It was,
that wasn't XL rubber, it was
yes, it was.
XL rubber?
That was it.
XL?
Yep, that was it.
And what did they make?
I'm not sure. Of course, Chemetex made shades.
Window
And,
shades?
Yes.
That went all over the world, didn't
Yes, big.
they? Were they owned by somebody in Akron, or did we just have them ourselves here?
It was Akron.
Akron, probably a Cyberling or something like that, wasn't it?
Could have been.
And it went out of business in the 30s, I believe, it did
Yes.
it not? And then, of course, the Barefoot Soul came in the 40s and all of that.
Yes.
I think it remained vacant for quite some time. Going back up to High Street now, we are at 261 or Akron Road, and we're looking north. As you would look north as far as you can possibly see, which would be to presently where 76 is right now, do you remember how many farms there were or how many houses there were?
Well, there weren't very many because they were pretty good size.
Big farms, 100-acre farm, 160-acre farm, some
They
of
were
them
pretty good size.
big farms. They would go all the way back to Leatherman Road.
Sure.
Yeah, and the Halls were up there. And who were some of the other farmers up there?
I really can't remember.
At this time, however, even in 1997, every single square inch is a house.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, we have the shopping center, and then beyond that, which were all farms, we go all the way up to the Sharon Township line. What I wanted to point up here was that at one time, Wadsworth was small enough that the entire city fell within 1 mile of the square north, 1 mile of the square east, 1 mile of the square west, and 1 mile of the square south. That was it.
Yeah.
It was just 16 square miles, which was 1 square, and then in the middle of it we had the town. Now we go 5 miles north, probably 3 miles south, and how far west do we go? At least good 2 miles. And on the east side, right now it's not that completely developed, but within this next year they're going to put 500 homes
Yeah.
2 miles away from Wadsworth, 500 homes. We have developed significantly, but you remember, Dick, when
yeah.
it was nothing more than the nucleus here.
Absolutely.
And you also probably remember that you could walk up and down town and probably mention and name almost every person you saw.
Everyone.
And if you didn't know the person's name, it was only because
Now, you know that at one time Western Star was almost going to be bigger than Wadsworth.
yes, because of the railroads.
Yes.
And somebody went up and did a little negotiating, and we got the
Yes.
railroad here in Wadsworth. Carl Harder
That's
told us,
right.
and boy, you remember that. I'm so grateful to you for
Yeah.
that.
Something, if you want to take a break from your questions for a moment,
Go ahead.
I'd like to mention some of the old-time doctors.
Would you please?
Not the new crop. They speak for themselves. But years ago, Dr. Johnson, R.L. Johnson,
R.L.
was
Johnson,
probably the dean of men.
He delivered me.
He did me too.
Tell us about.
He told me I was the healthiest baby he had delivered.
I think that he probably said I was the heaviest you had delivered.
No, I might have been the first. I don't know. No, I'm just kidding. But he was a great doctor, and he became mayor of the city, and he was instrumental in promoting the old municipal hospital.
Right. Tell us about a physical defect which seemed to help him for delivery.
He had a couple of fingers off this hand, and the other 3, he became very adept with them, and actually, it became more of a blessing to him than a handicap. He was able to do some kinds of surgery with that smaller hand that others couldn't do at the time.
I don't know if this is true or not, but they used to say that for an obstetrician, can't say the word obstetrically, that was very handy. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's true or not. That's what they used to say.
I have heard that also.
Then his daughter,
Myra,
became a doctor as well.
and she was in personality exactly like her dad, gruff,
Exactly. Oh, very gruff.
and businesslike.
He scared the daylights out of all of us, but he was a good doctor. Oh, he was a
He'd
good
come
doctor.
to your house with that black bag and open
Yes.
it up, and he had all kinds of colored pills in there. Some of them were probably placeables, but some of them might have done some good.
He told me one time, says, now do you want good pills or bad pills? And I said, I want good pills. So he rummaged through his...
Yeah. Well, he was a great guy.
He really was.
And then down the street, towards town was Dr. Miller. Very fine doctor.
Where was his office?
About where the bank is now.
Which bank?
The First National, or now what's it called? Huntington?
Oh, they changed names every week.
Yeah, what's in that area? Dr.
Right
Miller.
there.
And in the old days, they all had their residence along with their office.
Same place, right?
Yes. And then around the corner on Broad Street was Dr. Biggs.
In the big brick house.
Yes.
Across from the old post
And it's
office.
still there and still impressive.
It is.
And Dr. Biggs got to where he wasn't practicing too much, but he became a stamp collecting buff. And he had a tremendous collection, stamp
Is
collection.
that right?
Yes, indeed.
What was Dr. Biggs like? Not too many people know him.
Well, he was sort of businesslike, not too sociable, sort of a cool man.
Aloof and distant.
He wasn't angry with you, he
No.
just wasn't real outgoing.
Right.
But he was a great, nice man. And then on down the street there was Dr. Durling on Main Street.
On Main Street.
And then around the corner was Dr. Bolwick,
Where was Dr. Boldick's office?
about where Dr. Klotz's office was.
Oh, down there, I see.
And then up the street was Dr. Kuntz.
Yes, I remember that name, but now I can't place where he was.
And interestingly, right next, well, in fact, I think it's where Dr. Kuntz was, or next door, where my grandfather's house was. Where they put the hose under the front porch.
Oh, for heaven's sakes, where was Dr. Kuntz's house?
The second one from the corner.
From Mill
On Main,
Street?
yes.
Mill Street on Main. What about the early dentists? You mentioned Dr. Paul Goss a little while ago.
Okay, we'll start with Dr. Kramer, Marguerite Straighton's father,
That was
Dr. Kramer. And his office is on the corner of High Street and Maple.
okay. Right on the opposite corner from Myra Johnson's.
Right.
Yes.
And he had quite an interesting and long career as a dentist, and he was also a little bit of a politician and interested in local affairs, and probably worked on committees, things of that type. A pretty great guy. And then there was Dr. Goss, of course.
Dr. Paul, big man.
Yes. And he used to work on a patient or two, and then he'd take time off and go down to Brenneman's and socialize for a while.
Yeah,
Then he'd go back up.
Big socializer.
Yes. And those steps going up there were wooden, and they creaked. You remember going up
I
and down
do,
there?
surely.
And you remember the smell coming from
Right.
Dr. Goss' office?
Right.
At that time, I think they used a lot of clove or something like that.
And stale clove was one of the worst things that you can get.
It permeated the whole building.
Yes, right, it did.
And even came down the stairway.
That's so true.
And then there was another dentist, Dr. Boyer, just down a little from Dr. Bollick. Never practiced at dentistry. He was a graduate. Dr. Boyer.
What did he do?
He got interested in local corporations, the salt company and other things, and never worked at his profession.
Isn't that something?
Now, I can't think of any other dentist.
Dr. McCritchie.
Oh, McCritchie,
Dr.
yes.
Glenn McCritchie.
He was,
above the bank.
and then
Citizens.
he was in a double house on Lyman Street.
Oh, really?
That was where he ended his dental career.
On Lyman Street, I didn't realize that. Now, he was a great oboe player,
Yes, he was.
and he played with the Akron Symphony.
One time, I understand he played in a Sousa band.
Yes, he did. He played in the Sousa band.
Yes.
He was really a great person. In the Myers block, which of course was on the northwest corner of High and College, the opposite corner, the northeast corner, was the Brenneman building.
Yes.
And that was named for Glenn Brenneman and for Clara Beck Brenneman,
Yeah.
who was as a colleague of your sister's. And that was bounded by High Street on the west and Broad Street on the south.
All right.
Above Brenneman's, and we've already talked about, the good sundaes and the sodas and all those other kinds of things, but above Brenneman's there was the American Automobile Association.
Yes, I was a director in that when they started.
You were a director of that when it started. And who was the first?
Shortly after.
Who was the first person?
Bide Hogan, B.L. Hogan was the
B.L.
secretary.
Hogan. Describe B.L. Hogan to us a little bit.
He was portly, jolly, great guy. One time he delivered milk, I believe.
Tell us about his glasses.
Oh, they were heavy.
Heavy, and he many times would have only one of these things,
Yes.
whatever the temples.
He was a good secretary for the Auto Club for a number of years.
I can remember him so very, very well because during the war, the Second World War, all of my brothers were in the service. My parents did not drive, and I was age 13, and I knew how to drive. Something close to the way
Right.
you learn how to drive. So my father and I went to him, and my father said, I cannot drive, I don't drive, but my son knows how to drive, he's only 13. So, well, you have to be 16 to get a license.
Yeah.
Unless you write to the state. And I was probably as big as I am right now. And I said, well, do I write or do you? So you write, you want the license. I wrote to the state, and they granted the license. I got a regular license, and B.L. Hoagland had to type it up and give it to me.
Yes.
With 2 fingers, he would use that old-fashioned typewriter up there. And he said to my father, he said, now, I don't want that boy driving by himself. My father says, you don't have to tell me that you won't want that boy driving by himself. I didn't drive a car by myself until about 92 years old. But I remember B.L. Hogan, but he was a formidable-looking fellow.
And incidentally, also above Brownlands was another dentist, Dr. Parr.
Dr. Parr, just took the words out of my mouth. Dr.
He
right
left
next
for
to
the
him.
Navy and never came back.
Never came back, huh? But he didn't die. He just didn't come back to Wadsworth.
He just went somewhere else.
And that was P-A-A-R, wasn't it?
That's right.
P-A-A-R, not P-A-R-R. Or was it P-A-R-R?
Now you got me confused. I think it was maybe P-A-R-R.
One of the two, yeah, probably it is.
I think it was R.R.
Now, there were some legal offices up there, too.
Yes?
Who were they?
Oh, my. I don't remember those.
Well, we'll come back to that one in a second, but how about going over to the southwest corner over the Citizens Bank building and tell us about the legal person who was in there?
Well, Wayne Garver.
Wayne Garver.
And Louis Wilson.
And Louis Wilson. Wilson and Garver.
Right.
Tell us about those 2 people.
Well, Garver was very colorful, and he was
colorful.
He was the lead man. He took Lewis in when he was a young lawyer, and they had a good practice. And WW had a lot of contacts. He came here from Rittman, and they were a good team.
And what other kinds of things did Garver do?
Well, they did a lot of wills, probates, and I don't know what all.
Now, they had a daughter, Pat Garver.
Yes.
Yes, and I think Pat was adopted, wasn't she?
I think so.
Yeah, she was adopted. I graduated with her.
Yeah.
I remember her very, very well. We got the doctors, we have the dentists. Now, how about the lawyers? What about Merle Agan?
Merle had a reputation for being the slowest at closing an estate of anybody in the area.
Oh, really?
He was very thorough and all that, but he was slow. And there used to be many stories told about how long it took to close an estate.
Well, he was where? Where was he located?
Well, he was down above what was the old post office on Main Street.
Which was the B&B store at that time, and he was upstairs, and Dr. J.K. Dearling was up there, too, for a while.
Yes, for a while.
Matter of fact, Dr. J.K. Dearling lived up there for a while.
For a while? That's right. I remember that.
Did we have any other attorneys in Wadsworth that you can remember? Carl Schanz, for instance.
Carl was here.
And do you remember Carl?
Oh, yes.
And he came here in the 30s, didn't he?
Yes.
What was he like?
Very nice guy.
Nice person.
Yes.
He could be on television, couldn't
Very
he?
well liked. He was related to Glenn Brenham in some way.
I knew that there was a relationship. I didn't know exactly how.
Yeah.
Now, his wife was Portia.
Yes.
Portia Schanz. Beautiful person. I think she was a school teacher, wasn't she?
Yes.
Something like that. Who were some of the other attorneys?
I can't think of them right now.
Okay, now, let's go from the professional people to some of the other people that we know in town that you would remember. There were some truck drivers that delivered, and one of them was Louis Mills.
Oh, yes.
Tell us about Louis Mills.
Louis was a happy-go-lucky guy, always had a pleasant word for everybody, and he could handle a lot of weight. He knew how to
do
lift.
it. He was born up on Reimer Road. wasn't he?
I think so.
Yes, and he had a sister, Eunice, and he had an older brother,
Carl.
Carl Mills, and Carl was a painter, wasn't he?
Yes.
Carl Mills was a painter. Big men.
Yes, tall.
Well, actually, Louis was kind of short, but strong as a bull.
Yes.
Strong as a bull. And Eunice Mills married Willard Hollinger.
Yes.
You had mentioned, no, it was somebody else mentioned Keith Hollinger yesterday. That was
Yes.
Wes Bixler married Keith, or he mentioned Keith Hollinger.
Yes.
But she married Willard Hollinger, and then she lived in Corpus Christi for a while. What about some of the characters in town? And I'm going to ask for one person whom we all dearly love, but Moore.
Doc Moore?
No.
Earl Moore or Doc Moore? Not him.
Oh, mercy. How we miss our minds when we get older.
Well, do you remember I told you about a character, the old Civil War veteran?
Yes.
He had a son named Brownie Miller, and he was a motorman conductor on the streetcar line.
Oh.
And Brownie was so imbued with the free enterprise system that he went into partnership with the company, but he had failed to let them know about it.
Oh, he didn't tell them about it.
So they put a checker on and caught him with the evidence. Called him in and told him they'd have to let him go. And he wanted the job so bad, he said, "I'll promise to pay back everything that I took." And they told him, "Don't worry about it. We feel we're lucky to get the car back."
No kidding.
They didn't hire him back.
Oh, I would imagine not if
No.
he became partner with the company, didn't tell them anything about him.
Yeah.
You had mentioned Doc Moore. Well, who was Doc Moore and what was he like?
Oh, he was a real character, heavy and walked slowly and blustery.
And what did he wear all the time?
Same old clothes all the time.
And suspenders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he did an awning business. Go around to homes and put them up and take them down, repair them, sell them new ones. He was quite active in that field. How much time do we have?
You have about 3 minutes.
I wanted to tell you about another grandparent of mine.
Okay, please do.
Dr. Simmons, country doctor, A.L. Simmons. His 200 acres was down on Silver Creek Road.
Where?
Well, I can't identify it exactly, but it was down in that area. There was 200 acres on the farm, and they discovered coal on it. They took out 200 tons of fine bituminous coal every day.
Well, it would have to be in the southeastern quadrant then.
Probably.
I live over that.
That's right. That's why I wanted to mention it to you. And he was a fine country doctor. He had a helper, and when someone would ride in on horseback and say, "Doctor, can you come out? My wife's sick or my boy," the helper would hitch up the horse to buggy and away he'd go with his black bag full of medicines. But his grandparents were born about 20 years before the Revolutionary War.
Here in this area?
No, in eastern area. And one of the opposite, the maternal branch was called Link, A.L. Link. And he was a fighter in the War of 1812, that Indian uprising.
For heaven's sakes. What was A.L. Simmons' first name, do you know?
Yes, Adam Lewis.
Adam Lewis, for heaven's sakes. I didn't know.
Now, it's interestingly, they didn't go to medical school at that time.
No, they would learn from
They interned,
apprenticeship.
and when the doctor felt they were trained, he would let them go on their own.
They were good, too.
And Dr. Simmons was my great-grandfather. He had...
Mother's side?
Yes.
Mother's side.
And he was the father-in-law of Dick Weaver.
Oh, for heaven's
I
sake.
told you so much about.
Yes.
And he had 2 children. 2 daughters died, and 2 wives died early on. Then he developed this practice, and he had 6 more daughters and 3 sons.
Wow.
And one of his daughters was my grandmother.
Your grandmother. And we're blessed for that because they gave you your parents, and your parents gave you us, and we're pleased. 2 hours have gone by, and we still don't have all of Dick Curtis. But we're going to quit for the moment, and hopefully we can get you back on the group one that we're going to have on Friday.
I've about shot my wad, I think.
No, you haven't. You still have a lot to go. You have so many memories.
I have
Thank
to leave
you.
on the 13th.
Well, we'll get you before then. Thank you, Dick. We really appreciate it.
Okay.